Diana, welcome, and everyone else, welcome too. Diana Leitch
Right.
will be talking to us about Sir John Tomlinson and Henry Brunner, two men with a lasting legacy in the northwest of England. Sir John, I could say more, but I think it's better we hear it from Diana. Over to you, Diana. Please begin.
Thank you, Peter. Right, well, welcome everybody, and it's very nice to talk to you this afternoon. I am talking about these two brothers. There was a third brother, as you will hear, but let's go. So it's John Tomlinson Brunner and his brother Henry. Wait a minute. Now what's happening? Should be moving here. There we go. So that's me. I used to be Diana Bridges. That was my father's name. You probably heard, was a chemist. I was awarded an MBE in 2014 for services to chemistry. And I'm very proud of that because it is very, very rare to have anybody appointed with that sort of background. Sadly, should be far more. And I am a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry, also a chair of trustees at the Catalyst, and I'm a local and family historian. Oh, what's happened now? Right, okay. Peter said to me, why did I put the Catalyst logo up? Because Catalyst is so integrated into this talk, as you will see. So here we go. How did all this happen? Well, on the 6th of July 2019, I was at the Bronner Hall, which is named after the Brunner family, at Sir John Dean's College in Northwich. And it was a Brunner family gathering because it was 100 years since their ancestor, John Tomlinson Brunner, had died. So why was I there? Well, I'd had a chance meeting with Sir Hugo Brunner, who's the great-great-grandson of Sir John Tomlinson Brunner, former lieutenant of Oxfordshire. And we discovered that we had family connections, similarity between our families' journeys. And he asked me to come and give a talk to the family members and others who were gathered from around the world. And I do mean that because his nephew came from Australia for this event. And we were in the Brunner Hall, and there was over nearly 100 people there. So what are my connections with all this? Well, Clarence Bridges was my father. He went to Sir John Dean's in Northwich and actually sat in the Brunner Hall. My Widnes family are connected with that. And he started work at Willington Works of Brunner Mund. So here he is. This is him aged 11 in the early 1920s, showing proudly his school uniform of Sir John Dean's College. And he's off to be in the Brunner Hall, which had been established in 1911. So this is early 1920s. That's him in his sixth form uniform. And that's my mother. And they're sitting on the front in Widnes. Because my mother came from a family who lived in Widnes, who also were involved in the chemical industry. So that's a little background about my family. Who were the Brunners? Well, John Tomlinson, Henry's father, John Brunner, was Swiss. He was a Unitarian minister, and he came to Liverpool to run a school in Topsted, which in those days, this is the 1830s, was a very, very nice green area. And he came to run the school along the lines of Pestalozzi. He married a lady from the Isle of Man called Margaret Curfey, and they had 3 sons, Henry, John, and Joseph, and 2 daughters. Sadly, like many women in Victorian times, Margaret died aged only 33 from consumption, leaving John with 5 small children. Their father almost immediately remarried a teacher called Nancy Wyman, and she took the family and his school under control because the school had come into financial difficulties. There were a considerable number of unruly pupils, but Nancy took the whole family under control. Let's go back in time. So we've got the 2 families to the alkali industry in Widnes. And around the middle of the 19th century, they're using the Leblanc process. This is what Widnes looked like, or the area looked like. If you can spot just down here, if we can find it here, that's Runcorn. This is the River Mersey coming down from Manchester through Warrington, and it comes to a little point here, which is called Runcorn Gap. And this is West Bank in Widnes. You can see there is no habitation there at all. And this is a view from that area looking across to Halton Castle, which is on the other bank of the River Mersey. You'll see a little boat coming down here. This is Liverpool this way, and this is Manchester this way. And you'll notice a road going down here to one building, and that was called the Boathouse Inn. And that's where ships stopped off on their way from Liverpool up to Warrington, and people would go and wander in this idyllic area. A lot of it on either side was marshland, but that's what the area looked like in the 1840s. So I've mentioned Nicholas Leblanc, there he is. That's the statue that was put up to him in France after the Napoleonic Wars. And you probably know that he committed suicide because Napoleon confiscated his factory and the money that he'd been given by the government for establishing the Leblanc process to make alkali. And here is his process. Now, hopefully, quite a lot of you are chemists, so you'll recognise some of this. Here's the sodium chloride coming in. This is salt coming in from Northwich and Winsford, coming into Runcorn along the River Weaver. You mixed it with vitriolic acid, here we are, sulfuric acid. You got off that wonderful pollutant hydrochloric acid as gaseous. You made sodium sulfate, you mix that with coal, carbon, and you got another wonderful pollutant off, carbon dioxide, we all hear about. You got sodium sulfide, you mixed it with lime, and the lime came to the area from Buxton, but also along the Dee and along the Mersey from North Wales. So you got all the ideal conditions in the area of coal coming from St Helens on the Widnes side, or coming from Duke of Bridgewater's mines in East Manchester at Worsley to make what we're all after, and this was alkali down here. And you also got this wonderful byproduct, calcium sulfide, which was deposited around in Widnes. And here we are, just a few years after those early pictures you saw of just idyllic rural landscape. This is 1859, and here we've got a works with, this is the New Cut Canal and the Sankey Canal, railways and everything else. And this is the beginning of the development of the Widnes area. You notice Gaskell Deacon Works here, the future site, it'll come up later, of Widnes Laboratory and railways, and then you've got Gossage Works and Towers. So it took very, very little time to actually develop this area. Right, so Henry Brunner was born in 1838 and John in 1842 in Liverpool, and they both started work at Hutchinson's alkali factory in Widnes in 1861. And they were working with John Hutchinson, and he only lived for 40 years, but did an awful lot. And he used this process. He had been at ATR in Switzerland, where he'd actually met another boy called Andrew Kurtz, whose father ran a factory in Widnes. So that was how Hutchinson actually came to Widnes. And there he is. That's a painting we have in the gallery in Catalyst, and he looks the typical Georgian gent. So the Brunner boys started at Hutchinson's works. Henry Brunner was actually the scientist. He was the older brother. He studied physics, not chemistry, at ATH in Switzerland, and he spoke both English and German, and this was important later on, as you'll see. And that is him. So that's Henry. His brother, John, was the administrator and finance person. He wasn't a scientist at all. He didn't go to university, but went straight into business in Liverpool with a shipping firm. As did their younger brother, Joseph. He joined another shipping firm in Liverpool. And that is John as a fairly young man. They worked in the tower building of Hutchinson's, which had been built in 1855 and was the administrative hub of Hutchinson's works. Henry started first, John followed him, and it was the American Civil War that affected John's original job, because obviously trade in Liverpool was hit by the blockades and everything else that were going on of ships going back across the Atlantic. And this is the building they came to work in. Now, if you can imagine, just ignore this bit on the side and here, the original building was just this. It's described in Pevsner, it's grade 2 listed as an Italianate building, and it's a very ornate building. This bit here was added in 1908. And that's another view of it in the 1960s. So this is the original building here, and that's that extension on the side. And then you get all these other buildings here. So that's where the two of them worked. And then we get the appearance of Ludwig Mund. He came to England in 1862, the year after they'd started with Hutchinson's, and he was looking for soda manufacturers to use his process, which he developed for sulphur recovery. Hutchinson was actually the largest soda manufacturer on Merseyside, so it's quite sensible for Mund to navigate towards Hutchinson's. There were also a huge number of public complaints about the obnoxious sludge discharged from the alkali factories in the area, and that calcium sulfide that you had on the side is called galligoo. It's the only use of that word, and it's in Widnes. And at Catalyst, there are lumps of it. It looks just like a piece of concrete, but actually that is galligoo rescued from the surrounding areas, because they used to just dump it everywhere. He came to Widnes, and Hutchinson paid him £300 a year to sort out some of his problems. Now, that's actually a very large sum of money. Henry and John found Ludwig accommodation initially at a pub called the Snig Pie Inn on Mersey Road, and then with Stephen Hunt, who was the postmaster of a quiet village about 20 minutes walk from the factory. Now, you have actually seen this pub before. It didn't look like this. It was that little building I pointed out across the fields. And this road here, which is Mersey Road, was the road coming down to that pub. It was known as the Snig Pie Inn because snigs are the eels that you had in the Mersey, and the landlord of the pub made snig pie or eel pie. Okay, it's not in good condition. It needs to be done up, and it's a Holt's brewery pub. And we're going to write to them and say, look, you know, why don't you do something about this particular pub, because it is so historic, and the landlord is very, very interested in the history of the area. But that is where Ludwig Mund first stayed. He then left Widnes in the mid-1860s and went to Belgium, went back to Germany, but he returned in 1867. And of course, by that time, Hutchinson had died and Henry Brunner had become the works manager. Ludwig had also married while he was away, as had John Brunner, but many happy evenings were spent by the men at a club they founded. And this is a little terrace of houses built in 1863 in the middle of Widnes, and it's again the only use of this word Caluda. But this is the window of the house that John Bronner and his wife lived in. It's now above Boots the Chemist in Albert Road in Widnes, if anybody knows the area. And this is the club. It was known as the Qu'est-ce Club, or the Definition Club. And you might say it was really for the intelligentsia of Widnes. And the people who were members of it thought of themselves, all men, of course, of the intelligentsia. It only existed for about 18 months. The original minute books and everything else are in the archives at Liverpool University Library, and they've allowed us to actually look at these. So who were the members? Well, there they are. There's Henry Brunner, of course, and they had these names. He was Nemo, or Nobody. John Brunner was known as Onward and Upward, and didn't actually have, well, another name. Eustace Carey They and his wife had musical evenings. And Mund was already there with a song, and Henry Brunner sang tenor and played the zither, we're told. So Eustace Carey, little by little, and here's Ludwig Mund. And he had a German name, Unversagt, undaunted. And here's a name, James Liebig Muspratt, Ireland forever. This is Irish. And it was Muspratt who actually really had come first to Widnes, because he was driven out of Toxteth. It was a bit like Nimbo. He'd already got the beginnings of an alkali factory, and the natives said, go down the river. If you're going to have pollution, go down the river and go down to Widnes, but get out of Toxteth. So the Muspratts established themselves in Widnes. And then there was James Raven, who was the head teacher at the local grammar school, and Walter Angus Watts, who was an early member of this club. So that was the club the men joined in. Then you get William Gossage coming to Widnes in the 1860s, and he created the great Gossages Soap Company near to original Hutchinson building, and eventually he moved into the Hutchinson buildings where the Brunners were working. And there he is, that's William Gossage. Now, he originated in Lincolnshire, but he moved around the country, including being at Stoke Prior in Worcestershire in the 1830s, and being in Chesterfield and various other places, Ludlow, but he eventually came to Widnes. And where he built his original factory, this is a picture of the area, was on this bit of land here. This is the Sankey St Helens Canal coming down into the River Mersey. And you see these little buildings. This was housing for people who worked here. And we now think that Gossage first lived here with some of his workers. And they came up from Stoke Prior in Worcestershire. But this is there's the building that you've seen before. This is the great Gossages factory. And where there had been absolutely nothing before, you get this incredible set of housing being built, not good quality housing, all the way down to the River Mersey. And you can see here the way in which goods went out. These are the barges, Weaver flats going out through here and out to the Mersey and taking all the products of this particular firm, which originally was Hutchinson's, out to the world. Okay. And I mentioned Galligoo. You wonder what that is. It's the foundations of a church, but that was the Anglican church, which they built on top of Galligoo, not realizing it was unstable, and the building started to disappear into the ground, so they had to pull it down. But obviously this area has transformed over the years. By 1871, John Brunner and Ludwig Mund talked about a partnership and starting their own factory to put new ideas into practice. They weren't that happy with the Leblanc process, and they heard that Solvay was making soda by a different process without offensive pollutants and waste. Here is Solvay, the Belgian, and that's his process. Now, you know, there is some carbon dioxide in the middle of there, but you haven't got gaseous hydrochloric acid coming off. You've got the end product that you want here. And so they were much keener on this Solvay process. And this is a comparison of the cost of soda by the Leblanc process at Widnes and the Solvay process, which was being used at Winsford. And this is actually Ludwig Mund's own handwriting. These documents are actually in the Catalyst archives. And he worked out, you know, what were different costs. Could they make more money by one rather than the other? And they tried to persuade Gossage, who was now running Hutchinson's factory, but he didn't want changes from the Leblanc process, which was being used at his firm, and he didn't want to go with the Solvay process in Widnes. So they set off to find somewhere else where they could build a factory. And they went with a man called Edward Milner. He had works at Anderton near Northwich, and they found a site at Willington near Northwich, which eventually became the great company of Brunner Mund. And here's Edward Milner. The Brunner Mund Company was established in as a company in 1881, and he was one of the first directors. And he enabled them to find Willington Hall. And here is Willington Hall in 1866. Now, some of you may have been there in the halcyon days of Brunner Mund, or even it's now Tata Chemicals. And the building was about 300 years old in parts. It was being run at this time as a girls' school. And John Ruskin was one of the teachers here. And this is a lovely sports photograph, because look at these girls playing cricket, 1866. Did happen in those days. So this is what they found. At the time, the Willington Hall estate belonged to Lord Stanley of Alderley, but he'd put up the whole estate for sale. But John and Ludwig only wanted to buy part of the estate, but Stanley said all or nothing. So they took a big risk, encouraged by John. It was Ludwig who was very, very nervous about doing this because of the financial situation they might find themselves in. But in the end, they bought the whole estate. And they started building the works there in 1873. Okay. And both families lived together initially in Willington Hall. And it's said that Ludwig actually slept on some of the building materials just to keep an eye on the workmen who were actually building the works around them. The Munds lived in the Georgian part of the hall, which you see in a minute, and the Brunners lived in the Tudor part. And they had to do a lot of work to the Tudor part. And very sadly, a bit like his mother, just after it was finished, John's wife, Sally, again, only aged 34, died and left him with 5 children. And she died of consumption, just like his mother had. And this was so common in those days for young people to die in their 30s. And here we are. This is the Willington Hall estate. So you can see some of the factories which have been built in the background. This is the Tudor part that the Brunners lived in. This is the Georgian part, Wyatt, that the Munds lived in. And this building here was a pine house growing pineapples, but it was Ludwig Mund's private laboratory at times. He did actually move to live a lot of the time in London, but he had a private train that came up from London and stopped at Hertford Station, where they met him, and he was brought by horse and cart across here. And he had actual scientists who worked in there on some of the perfecting the techniques that they would use out on the factory. But it was quite strange, you know, coming up a bit like the Queen in his own private carriage on the train, attached to the rest of the train coming up from London. Initially, times were very hard when they started, with lots of setbacks and financial worries, and they could only pay themselves a salary of £10 a week. Now, actually, that was quite a lot. But within 3 years, they'd paid off their debts and the salaries were £30 a week. This was one of their sleeping partners, Charles Holland of Finance, and John Crossfield. Now, of course, Crossfield's works became part of Unilever latterly, but he was the first chairman of Brunner Mund and Company Limited when it was established in 1881. Ludwig Mund's wife, Frieda, and John Brunner's first wife, Sally, had been very, very good friends. But when Sally died in 1874, John, left with all these children, married the children's governess, Jane Wyman, and they had 3 more children, all little girls. Jane and Frieda Mund were never friends, as Frieda thought Jane belonged to a lower class than her, although Jane's father had been a doctor in Kettering. So the women just didn't get on, let's put it like that. This is a picture of the works 11 years after it was founded. So you can see it's in quite steady production now. And the first plant is the second shed from the right. So it's about here. John Brunner was a great advocate of improving the working conditions of his employees. And there's evidence in all the papers we've got that working hours were reduced Houses were built on estates, both for the workers and indeed for the managers. And John was appreciated by the employees at the works. So you could say he was in a different vanguard from many of the other industrialists at the time. And this is one of the early other directors of the firm. This has come from our Brunner collection. And this is John Isaac Watts. I show this one because I was doing this talk last year, and the gentleman said, "Have you got a picture of my great uncle?" And so we went straight and had a look, and his great uncle is John Isaac Watts, one of the original directors of Brunner. And he, this was presented to him Christmas 1904, and he was also, as well as being director at Brunner, he was the chairman of the Northwich and Mid Cheshire branch of the NSPCC. So here we have various people being named, and these were famous scientists at Brunner, okay? And that is actually, his wife here, opening the usual fete that you had at these various companies. I mentioned the Society of Chemical Industry before. It actually started in St Helens and Widnes as the Lancashire Chemical Society in 1881, which is why it was 140 years last year. Ludwig Mullens was the first chairman, and Sir Henry Roscoe, I'm sure many of you know, was the first president. And Henry Brunner was a founder member because, of course, he was the one who was a scientist, not John. And Henry Roscoe was a great supporter of academic and industrial cooperation. He was also the Liberal MP for South Manchester, and at the time, John Brunner had become an MP, so the pair of them were actually in Parliament as Liberal MPs, and they worked closely together on industrial cooperation. But not actually, there's Henry Enfield Roscoe. Brunner grew in strength, and to fight off the competition from Brunner, 48 small alkali companies, mainly in the Widnes area, but also tenants, for instance, in Glasgow, came together in 1890 to create the United Alkali Company, and that included Gossages. And that was the point that the famous Widnes Research Laboratory was built. Here it is, known as the Herter Laboratory. Why is that? It was called after Dr. Ferdinand Herter, who again was Swiss, born in Schaffhausen, and educated at ETH in Zurich. And like many Swiss and Germans, came to the burgeoning chemical industry in Widnes and Runcorn. And Widnes Laboratory is, let's get it right, over here. All right. But that was the great research laboratory. So this is at that time, here we go. The alkali industry of Widnes, not a pretty sight, can we just say that? You got these chimneys spewing out various sort of pollutants. There you have the building which the Brunners had been working in. And I'll show you this because that's known as Widnes on a good day. Why is it a good day? Because you can actually see the buildings. On a bad day, you can't even see the chimneys and everything else because the pollution's so bad. And that's looking across. So that was in a way what John and Ludwig left. Henry Roscoe became the first director of Cassner Kellner Works at Runcorn in 1897. It was still part of United Alkali Company. So Henry was involved with these firms that were still, in a sense, using the Leblanc process, whereas across in Northwich, they were using the Solvay process. Brine was pumped there from Northwich to be electrolyzed to produce chlorine, and it still is today. And it's owned, of course, by Ineos Innovin. And 24/7, 365, chlorine is produced there and is tankered away. And it's one of the few places still actually producing chlorine for other people as well as Ineos Innovin. Anyway, by the end of the 19th century, Brunner was the wealthiest chemical company in the UK, just 25 years after it was founded. And they celebrated the 25th anniversary in 1898. And this is an amazing photograph. You'll see in a minute why I refer to it as a bit like being Diana at Taj Mahal, because the two ladies sitting in the middle here, this is Frida Mund, and this is Jane Brunner. Okay, here is Henry, and here is Ludwig. And these two who hated each other just didn't talk, and that picture tells you that. Anyway, here's the rest of the Brunner and Mund families. And they're all named down below. The husbands got on like a house on fire. It was just the ladies, and it was really Frida who was being very unpleasant to Jane. So this is, again, is the same day, and it's the 25th anniversary of the foundation of Willington Works. There is John sitting beside a photograph of, two of his female members of the family, and here is Ludwig. And these were oil paintings, this one in particular, that hung in Willington Works. And we're not quite sure where they are at the moment. They disappeared a few years ago. Anyway, by 1926, you get the great amalgamation of 4 companies, including United Alkali Company and Brunner Mund, and it was Alfred Mund, Ludwig's son, and Harry McGowan of Nobel Industries who brought about that amalgamation. And here we are, that's Alfred Mund. You might recognise Lloyd George here, who made him Sir Alfred Mund. And here's the 4 companies, there we are. And that's what was created, ICI. This is a picture of the accounts team at Willington Works. And we have this amazing collection of photographs. I've picked this one out because as a family, we've been so involved with Brunners and Brunner Mund. That's my aunt, who worked in the accounts department at Northwich. And it was there at Willington Laboratory that they actually made polythene. And it was Roy Gibson and Eric Fawcett, 1933, and there is a plaque to that effect there. Willington Works in its heyday, there it is. Ignore when it says that today, because it's not like that at all today. But that's how it was in the past. Anyway, Sir John Brunner died in 1919. He was the MP for Northwich for 25 years. Sadly, he never saw the creation of ICI or the death of his son Roscoe Brunner, who was named after Henry Enfield Roscoe, and Roscoe's wife Edith in London in 1926. It's the famous Who Shot Who, was one a murder and one a suicide. And it was as a result of the creation of ICI when Roscoe was expecting to become a director of ICI, and it didn't actually happen. And his wife Edith was mortified. There are some very interesting books you can read about that. Another son of John's died in Lake Como in the 1890s, and he was heartbroken. And he moved back to Liverpool from Willington Hall, where he'd been living. He was knighted and became Sir John Brunner of Druids Cross. And Druids Cross is an area in Liverpool. This is Childwall Road. Anybody knows Liverpool? Childwall Nursery. And this is Druids Cross. And that's where they actually went back to live, in Liverpool. It's now a housing estate, as many things are. And at Willington Works, Tata Chemicals, we have the statues. These are the memorials to Sir John Brunner and Ludwig Mund. There we are, there's John Brunner. There's Ludwig Mund. There we are, there's John Brunner. They are at the moment outside Mund House, because there was a Brunner House and a Mund House. Brunner House was changed to being a sports centre many years ago, and the statues used to be on the main road outside Willington Works. They were moved here several years ago and actually unveiled by the Duchess of Kent, and I'll explain why in a minute. Because Tata Chemicals are pulling out of Willington Works, Wallerscope Works, which was one of theirs, has already been pulled down. These statues should be moving to the centre of Northwich soon. And they're just waiting for various planning permissions and groundworks and who's going to pay to move them to be put in place. Anyway, back in 2015, from the building behind Mund House, a group of us rescued major archives of Brunner material to add to our extensive collections we already have of the ICI General Chemicals Mund Division archives. We were tipped off that the building was going to be pulled down. It will eventually be pulled down. So we did rescue a huge amount of valuable material, and this is where it came to Catalyst. So John Brunner was known for his philanthropy, as well as creating the great company, as well as his work, for workers. What was his greatest philanthropic act? And in my view, it's the following. He chaired the board of the Runcorn and Widnes Bridge Company. There was no way of crossing the River Mersey between Runcorn and Widnes in a vehicle. And they determined to find a way of bridging the gap and providing a vehicular crossing. This is how you went across on foot, one of the ways, or you took your life in your hands because the Mersey is very tidal. You came, this is the Runcorn side, which is the church. This is Ferry Hut as it's known. And here these people are getting on the ferry. And the ferry's a rowing boat. So you'd be rowed across to the Widnes side and jump out in the mud on the other side. So not very easy, and certainly no way of taking a vehicle across. They commissioned a Mr. Wood to design a transporter bridge. And it was designed and made by John Webster, who was born in Warrington. And it was funded and opened by Sir John Brunner on the 25th of May, 1905. And the bridge was in use until 1961, when it was demolished. And at Catalyst, in the Brunner Gallery now, we have the story of the creation of the transporter bridge. So you're just going to whiz through. If you come, you can see the whole story, the design of it, the construction of it, the opening of it. And it was opened by Sir John and Lady Brunner. Edward VII was supposed to do it, but he was ill that day, so they were the substitute. And their car was the first vehicle to cross the River Mersey at this point. And here they are. And that's John, and that's Jane. She actually got her comeuppance on Frieda Mund because she became Lady Brunner. And of course, Frieda Mund's husband, Ludwig, never became Sir. It was their son. And so Jane secretly was very pleased that she was lady and Frieda wasn't, after all the unpleasantness there had been in the past. This is the Widnes side, here they all are. And this is the master of the transporter bridge to take them across. And here's their car coming across on the Runcorn side. And there it is. Now, I've actually travelled on that, maybe some of you have. It rocked about. You hoped you were going to get to the other side. It took a few cars, but it was the first ever. And it was John who actually pushed that through and paid for it. The only other way of crossing was there had been a railway bridge built. This is the London-Liverpool railway line here. And you could run up steps on one side and run down the other. And that meant that these people could either work for one of the chemical companies on one side and live on the other, or vice versa. But it was only pedestrian again, no vehicular traffic until the transporter bridge. This is all that remains, is the transporter bridge offices on the Mersey Road, Widnes side. Demolished in 61 and replaced by a second vehicular crossing opened by Princess Alexandra in 1961. And there it is. And the pub I showed you, the Snig Pie Inn, is just there. This is Mersey Road, and that was the second crossing. And this is a view from the top of Catalyst. And the third vehicular crossing is this amazing bridge, or the Mersey Gateway. There it is. A wonderful construction, although you do have to pay a toll, but it's worth it. And this again is looking across from the fields by Catalyst. So those are bridges. Sir John Brunner made many other benefactions, large and small. We'll just wish through many memorial buildings. Here's some of them here. That's at Acton Bridge, which is on the London Northwich railway line, and that's the parish room which he paid for in 1909. This is Barnton School, and Barnton just next door to Willington and Wallascote Works. So this is a school that he actually paid for. This was another school in Northwich, so you've got more schools being paid for, all Victorian schools. This is a visit of the Minister of Education, and this is Northwich Memorial Hall, tribute to Sir John Brunner. Western Village Hall overlooked Castlekellner works of ICI, and this is a picture of it. It had to be demolished because some of the chemicals which had been deposited further up the hillside were running through this hall and some of the houses below, and polluting people's cellars and everything else. So the whole area was demolished when people discovered what had actually been happening with some of the pollutants. In Runcorn, he bought an old Huntingtonian chapel, gave it to the town as a guild hall for the trades unions and friendly societies. So in his politics, he was very, shall we say, left, really, and wanted to support what ordinary people wanted to do. But this particular guild hall was demolished in 1976. In Winsford, here we are, this is the guild hall that he paid for. And there it is, it's still there today. And in Nantwich, public libraries were created by the Public Library Act, but to meet the needs of local people. But there wasn't enough to build one in Nantwich. And so the local MP sent him an appeal in 1886 and said, could you put some money into it? At the time, John and his family were on a world cruise and they were in Los Angeles. However, the appeal didn't raise much money until Sir John Bronner gave £200. And other people said, well, if he is, we better do that too. And this enabled the library to be built, and it was opened in Queen Victoria's Jubilee year in 1887. And of course, they invited him to open it. And it's now Nantwich Museum. Okay, now this is how it used to be here. That's a picture of it. I thought you'd love this. Anybody who's a librarian, information person. These were the rules imposed by the librarian, who was one of the very, very few female librarians when it opened in 1887. And there it is today. Now it's Nantwich Museum. And some of you may know that one of the committee members of the Historical Group, and she's also committee member of SISAG, Helen Cook, who has given you talks, is actually a trust here at Nantwich. So a bit like me, Helen and I are trying to put our chemistry knowledge and interests back into helping some of these museums, but that's Nantwich Museum. In Liverpool, they'd worshipped at Renshaw Street Unitarian Church and then at Ullett Road Unitarian Church, because the Brunners were of Unitarian faith. And here's Renshaw Street Chapel. And here's Ullett Road Unitarian Church, which is still there and is still used. Lots of commemorative cups, of course. And the chemical industry's Brunner Golf Club is still competed for. It was competed for in 2019, and we actually borrowed it on the day that the Brunner event at Northwich in July 2019. And if you look carefully, Max Woosnam, who worked at Brunner, won it in 1933. And the cup, you can see some of the names. So you've got George Bernard Cotton, who was a civil engineer. There's the cup. And there we are, close up. There's George Bernard Cotton. You've got this guy from Lancro. You've got other people here, Brunner Mund, ICI, Agricultural Division. And it wasn't competed for in 2020 or indeed 2021, but they are hoping that they'll be competing for it again. There are cups for all sorts of things. So how are we at Catalyst honouring Sir John's life and that of his brother Henry and their legacies? Well, we're past, present and future. We're preserving the archives and artefacts of the chemical industry, of which Sir John and Henry were such a part, and making them available for researchers through digitisation. Because we've got something like 40,000 photographs, we've got films and workers' records, which I'll come back to in a minute. We also have the complete ICI magazine from start to finish, and most of its supplements. A few we haven't got, so if you have any in your attics, lofts, or where ever, then us sellers, before your children throw them out, please let us have them. We can digitise them. Anyway, Henry Brunner continued to work at Hutchinson's in Widnes, and he lived in Liverpool, so he never really moved across to Northwich. He was associated with Brunner Mund, and his sons worked there in Northwich. The younger one moved to the Fylde, where he worked for ICI, and he was called Godfrey, and his grandson Stephen was actually born there. So you'll be aware that ICI had works on the Fylde, and that's what he was involved in. So they appear in the ICI magazine. We are the longest established science discovery centre and museum, and we're providing the kind of educational training and facilities for all ages that John and Henry would both have appreciated. And we've had a few extensions. This you'll recognise as the Duke of Kent. Now, what's he doing? He's opening an extension. I mentioned that the statues were unveiled at Northwich by the Duchess of Kent because she is actually a Brunner descendant. Her mother was a Brunner. And so we've always had these connections with the Kent family. So Hugo Brunner is now one of our patrons and a huge supporter of Catalyst, as all the Brunner family are. We now have a Henry and John Brunner room in the building where they worked, and it was opened on the 15th of October 2021. Here we are. This is the new revamped entrance to Catalyst. This is a big unit which the building was built round, and so it was, what were we going to do with it, because it came from BP in Hull, and it's great having this right round the front as you come in through the front door. So this is our CEO, Martin. This is the High Sheriff of Cheshire. That's me. This is Sir Hugo Brunner. And this gentleman will eventually become the Duke of Kent. That is the Earl of St Andrews, the older son of the Duke and Duchess of Kent. And he actually opened officially the Henry and John Brunner room, and he was delighted to be involved in this and to meet other members of the family. So here we are, and and this is Hugo presenting to our CEO this bell. The bell was presented to his great-grandfather when the Transporter Bridge was actually revamped in 1911 because there were some technical issues. That bell has been in Oxfordshire for about 80 years, and Hugo felt that we ought to have it. So he presented that to us in October 2021, and we're extremely pleased to have it on display in the Brunner Gallery. Adrian Brunner QC, who's Henry's great-grandson, and Stephen Brunner, who is his last living grandson, and families were also at the opening of the room on the 15th of October. We are a charitable trust, and we're determined to carry on keeping Catalyst alive. If you can help us, please do so. We're currently applying to the National Lottery Heritage Fund to renovate our Birth and Industry Gallery, which was established 25 years ago, contains Brunner materials, artifacts really, not archives, needs an urgent upgrade so we can portray the chemical industry in the area to new audiences. And that's one of our absolutely seminal things. It's a bleach packer, and there's just been a bleach packers project in Halton, but this was one of the most horrible jobs that men did back in the 19th century. It was a bit better by the 20th century because they had some more protective gear. We were closed for a very long period in 2021. We survived because we're a museum, and we got money from Arts Council England, Cultural Recovery Funds, and we survived because of that. Keep an eye on our website for the most up-to-date news. There's the website, and breaking news, and it's up there as a banner on the website because I saw it this morning, the fact that we have digitised 20,000 workers' records from ICI Brunner Mund, and they're available online. So if you go into that, You think you've got an ancestor, put the name in and see if they are there. And if you want the full record, we're charging a small amount, like a lot of the National Archives do, other organisations. It is an amazing resource. And obviously we've had to be careful about GDPR. It covers workers from 1876 right up to 1922, because you're allowed 100 years. And there's quite a lot of my relatives on there, I can assure you. People are so enthusiastic about being able to get into that. And it tells you on the site how to get there. So that's what we're talking about. That is what it looks like now. You remember that picture of how horrible it was before? And it was horrible. We're now trying to push the area, which was the Northern Powerhouse, as a visitor attraction. That's the Sankey Canal. That's where the Queen stood, just there with Meghan, remember, 2017, to open that new bridge. There is still some industry. Daresbury Innovation Centre's over here, and we've got lots of rollout companies. And I can't help feeling that John and Henry would have been proud of what we're doing. So I hope you enjoyed the talk. Come and visit us at Catalyst. You can see all of this and our new scientific interactives, which Wellcome funded 2 years ago, and our extensive chemical industry archives. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much, Dana, for another fascinating talk. It was very informative, not only about a leading family in the Northwest and indeed in the chemical industry, but also you did tell us quite a bit about the history of Brunner, Mund, which I'm sure people will find very interesting as well. I haven't actually had any specific questions. Helen Cook, thank you for the mention of the Nantwich Museum. I have to say, I went to the Nantwich Museum in 2019 because they were having a priestly celebration, and it did strike me, but it looked a bit like a library. So now I know it was a library. So my impression was not a misleading one. Just two other quick comments. It would be nice if the pub now called the Mersey could be called the Moon, because, you know, and in fact, I could take it a step further and have a hanging sign, which is a crescent moon, which of course was the symbol of Brunner, Mund, all of which, of course, was a pun on Ludwig Mullens' name in German.
Yes, yeah. Peter,
what you were saying about the archive, because as far as I can make out, and I'm very glad you got those archives, I thought they'd gone to the Cheshire Record Office, but it's useful to know that at Catalyst. Did anybody know what happened to the records of the central office, you know, the head office that used to be in Thames House? Certainly, I saw it in Thames House in the 1980s. There seems to be a great deal of doubt about what happened to them. My understanding is that they're in the Netherlands, but currently they're not available. Do you know anything about the central office, the head office archive?
Well, can I just say that sadly, the ICI records are distributed all over the place, Peter. You're talking about Leblanc. We've been trying to find out what from people who worked there. But, you know, as you and I know from something else we're working on at the moment, if we don't find out in the next few years, there will be nobody left who actually knows what's happened to these. There were some stories about things being down in a mine or a naval dockyard. And I know that some of the ICI records from the Northeast are at Beamish Museum,
right,
up there, you know, so that's the Northeastern ones. They're all over the place. Some of those records, workers' records I've just told you about, we actually inherited 2 years ago from Stoke Prior in Worcestershire. So some of those are not people who worked in Northwich or in Runcorn or Widnes, they worked in Worcestershire. And what really needs to happen is to actually work together and get at least a list of where all the records are. You are correct that some of them are in the Cheshire Record Office, but everybody's got limits to where, and when we rescued that stuff from Mund House, I went to Mund House with the then head of the Cheshire Record Office, because they'd no space to take them. They'd been offered them, and we could take them at Catalyst. So we were able to take those. but we are conscious there's others. The ICI Pharmaceuticals Division records, some of those are now in the John Rylands Library in Manchester, who don't really, well, they do have some chemical records. They have Dalton and Partington, but it just happened that the person who was trying to find a home for them spoke to somebody at the John Rylands. We would have been delighted to have those. And, you know, so we're actually trying to do our best to collect up and work together to find out at least where everything is, so it can do something. But we have explored what you just asked about Millbank, and nobody seems to know or be willing to tell anybody where they may have gone.
Okay, thanks, Dana. Somebody asked, he went to school with a Gossage in Surrey. Do you have any idea how the name Gossage is derived?
Gossage?
Gossage. Gossage.
Sorry?
Gossage. You know, the Gossage process.
Yeah, well, it's the family name.
I know, but how do you know how where the name come from?
Ah, right. The family come from Lincolnshire.
Okay.
And I said that Sir Hugo Brunner is one of our patrons. We now have a Gossage, I didn't mention this, we now have a Gossage Room, which was opened on the 5th of October 2021. And that some of the funding for that was from the Gossage family. So a man called Peter Gossage, who lives in West Sussex, he is the great-great-grandson of William Gossage.
Yeah.
But William Gossage was the youngest of 13 children. He was born in 1796, and the name seems to be there. Peter, I'm almost in daily contact with Peter. They've been exploring all their family history, but they haven't been able to go back very far before great-great-granddad William. They'd love to do that. It just seems to have been a name there. I mean, sometimes you just never know what the background to a particular name is.
Okay, thank you, Adana. And once again, thank you for a wonderful talk. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. We hope you enjoyed it. Certainly, several people have said what a wonderful talk it is and how well presented it was. Could I just remind everybody that we'll have our talk next month, same time, same day, the third Tuesday. Can't quite remember what the third Tuesday is, but probably anyway, you can work it out yourself. And it will be by Mary Virginia Horner from the United States, who won the HIST Award of the American Chemical Society last year for her work on the history of chemistry. And she will be talking about 3 elements, the discovery of 3 elements predicted by Mendeleev. So a little bit different from some of the things we've had up to now, but I'm sure it'll be very interesting. So once again, thank you, Dana, and thank you, everybody, for coming today. Bye for now, and see you next month.
Bye.